Hey everybody, I just want to jump on here and talk about, give a little bit of a book review on the most recent book I read. It is called America's First Crisis, The War of 1812 by Robert P. Watson. I have it right here. And I just want to go and say that if you are looking for a really good um, book that discusses the War of 1812 and you want to learn and learn all the little aspects and details of political stuff about it, that is definitely the book to go to. It also talks about the battles that took place and the um, uh, men and some women behind uh, what went on. Um, it has to be one of my favorite books of the War of 1812. I mean, I don't have many books on the War of 1812, but it's got to be one of my favorites, and I'm going to put it right next to my other favorite book on the War of 1812, and that is In All Their Glory Past, Fort Erie, Plattsburgh, and the Final Battles in the North, 1814, by Donald E. Graves. Um, this book is comparable to that one. Uh, Donald E. Graves is Canadian and wrote it not necessarily from the Canadian perspective, but since Canadians know more about the War of 1812 than us Americans, then he has a lot more resources. Uh, but Robert P. Watson, he does a really great job for the American stuff. Talks a lot about Andrew Jackson, talks about President James Madison, who is a founding father. Talks about a few of the scandalous generals of the war, some um, heroes of the war that come to be, and future presidents, like William Henry Harrison. We have James Monroe, who wasn't in the war, but he was still Secretary of War or Treasury, one of the two. Um, you have Winfield Scott, who reminds me a bit of, I would say, probably General Patton. I would go that far. If you've ever read a book on Patton, um, I read a book on Patton, and Winfield Scott kind of reminds me of Patton. Um, and we know he is to become later on the great campaigner in Mexico City from Veracruz during the Mexican American War, and also the great planner, strategist for the Civil War with the Anaconda Plan against the Confederate South. Um, but this book also discusses the famed Tecumseh, his rise to fame and power, his influence, and it really it really just gives a really good story, and it's 356 pages. I don't know if for you it seems like a lot. It was written really well, so it didn't seem like a lot. I wanted to keep reading it and learn more of what the book had to offer. It was one of those kind of books. Um, and with that, um, it reminds me of other good books I've read by some of the greater War of 1812 novelists, such as Lords of the Lake by Robert Malcolmson, the naval war on Lake Ontario. Because it also talks about the USS Constitution, the struggles on the Great Lakes, and even Lake Champlain, um, and other causes of the War of 1812. Now, um, it talks about um, MacDonough. It gives a brief history of him, where he learned his stuff from. Talks about Oliver Hazard Perry. It talks about old Revolutionary War veterans as well, who are either great or slow, um, or revered, or chastise, and and see where history left these men, uh, either rightfully so, or even in the shadows that they don't belong in. You just be the judge. But we do have some Revolutionary War heroes in that book that come back about. Uh, Mainly Andrew Jackson, who um, was a teenager during the Revolutionary War. Tells some people's motivation. Some British uh, generals, they want to get back at the revolutionaries, or now Americans. Uh, Talks about um, even the Americans want to get back at the British because they still feel like they didn't get their licks in, as some would say. Um, I'd also go as far as that's a bad spot, but I'll even go as far as you know just as it says, America's first crisis. There were a lot of political issues with the War of 1812 that discusses that helped frame what we have today. It helped build onto our foundation. Um, some surprising twists in here too, about the Federalist Party that you will read if you so happen to read it, which I highly suggest you do. And all in all, I would say this is probably one of my favorite War of 1812 books. I will say. Um, Now I know that there's ships on the front. It doesn't really talk that much about the naval warfare of the war. It does go into a great bit of detail, but a majority of it is more or less politics and the ground war. But it's not to say um, the British didn't have control of the ports. Now, the book I'm reading is the Saratoga campaign right now because it's an interim book until I get my book I really want. Because in a couple weeks, we're going to be going to Saratoga. That is my plan as long as the government shutdown is done. But either way, I believe the grounds are still open. You just can't get in the visitor center. So I'm really going to be heavily having to learn more about the battle and campaign of Saratoga. So I hope you stay tuned for that. I am excited. I have never been to Saratoga. I've driven past it plenty of times on my way up to Quebec, Plattsburgh, Lake George, Fort Ticonderoga, stuff like that. But I've never once been to the uh, turning point of the Revolutionary War battle. Um, well, with that being said, I would also love to visit Fort Stanwix or Fort Schuyler, as it is discussed in history. But Fort Stanwix is the name that presides over the fort, Fort Stanwix. Um, Both are national parks, so uh, I have to keep myself updated on the um, what's going on with them. But more or less, when the government shutdown ends, everybody will get back to resuming, and that's going to be in a couple weeks. So I'm hoping, with my fingers crossed, that this is done and over with, and I don't have to worry about anybody not being able to help me out, learn more about this great battle. Um, and I hope you stay tuned. And if there's other books that you would like for me to recommend, uh, comment below. I have a whole list of books I do recommend in the link below at bookshop.org. It is a whole array of books I've read, a whole array of ones I recommend to you that I can possibly get. So, if you like this video, please hit the like button, uh, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification button. And I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.